The silence in my apartment had a texture. It was thick, like dust motes suspended in a sunbeam, clinging to the furniture and filling the empty spaces where another person's breath should be. For 2 years, this particular silence had been my most constant companion, a roommate who never paid rent but took up all the room. I worked from home, a graphic designer tethered to a glowing screen, and my social interactions had dwindled to the polite nod I gave the delivery guy and the occasional, stilted phone call with my mother. My life had become a series of quiet, repeating loops. Wake, work, eat, stare out the window, sleep. Repeat. It was the staring out the window that did it. I'd watch people on the street below, living their loud, messy, interconnected lives, and a dull ache would settle deep in my chest. It was a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical attribute, like a phantom limb that was always cold. I had become an observer of my own life, watching it pass from a safe, sterile distance. My reflection in the darkened computer screen showed a man I barely recognized. My hair, a nondescript brown, had grown into an unruly mess, curling over my ears and forming a ridiculous wave at the back of my neck. It was the hair of a man who had given up, a hermit's hair, and looking at it, at the tired eyes and the pale skin, I felt a sudden, sharp pang of something other than resignation. It was annoyance. I was annoyed with this quiet, dusty life I had curated for myself. The decision was as small as it was monumental. I needed a haircut. It was a simple, mundane task, but for me, it felt like planning an expedition to a foreign land. The thought of the small talk, the forced proximity to a stranger, the bright lights of a salon, it all made my stomach clench. I'd been putting it off for months, trimming my own bangs with kitchen scissors with predictably disastrous results. But today, the annoyance won out over the anxiety. I didn't want to go to the chain salon at the mall, a place of chemical smells and indifferent stylists. A few weeks ago, a new place had opened up a couple of blocks away, on a corner I usually hurried past. The Gilded Razor, it sounded pretentious, but the storefront was anything but. It was old school, with a deep green facade, gold lettering, and a single, handsome-looking leather chair visible through the window. It looked quiet. It looked deliberate. It looked like a place a man could go to get a haircut without having to discuss his weekend plans. My heart hammered a nervous rhythm against my ribs as I stood outside the door. This is ridiculous, I told myself. It's a haircut. Men do this every day. But my hand trembled slightly as I reached for the heavy brass handle. The door opened with a soft chime, and I stepped inside, my carefully constructed silence immediately replaced by a world of quiet, masculine energy. The air smelled incredible, not of hairspray and peroxide, but of something warm and clean and complex. I could pick out notes of sandalwood, leather from the chairs, a faint, sharp tang of bay rum, and something else, something uniquely personal, like clean laundry and warm skin. The space was small and intimate, with dark wood paneling, antique mirrors, and a floor of black and white hexagonal tiles. Soft jazz played from a hidden speaker, a low, moody thrum of a saxophone that settled my nerves just a little. There was only one Barber chair, and it was empty. A man emerged from a back room, wiping his hands on a small white towel. He wasn't what I expected. I'd pictured someone older, perhaps with a handlebar mustache and a white apron. This man was probably around my age, maybe a few years older, in his early 30s. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his simple black t-shirt. His dark hair was cut short on the sides and slightly longer on top, styled with a casual precision that spoke of someone who understood his craft. He had a few days' worth of stubble that framed a strong jaw, and his eyes were the kind of warm, dark brown that seemed to see right through you. They crinkled at the corners when he smiled, a slow, easy smile that was both welcoming and a little bit mischievous. "Hey there," he said. His voice was a low, smooth baritone that seemed to vibrate in the small space. It was a voice that matched the smell of the shop, warm and reassuring. "Welcome to the Gilded Razor. I'm Julian. You looking for a cut?" I managed a nod, my own voice suddenly feeling thin and reedy. "Yeah, Leo. I don't have an appointment." Julian tossed the towel onto a countertop and gestured toward the empty chair. "Today's your lucky day. I just had a cancellation. Hop on up. What can I do for you?" The chair was as comfortable as it looked, cool leather sighing as I sat down. Julian draped a heavy, pinstriped cape around my shoulders, his movements efficient and confident. His fingers brushed against the back of my neck as he fastened it, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt of unexpected warmth through me. It was the first time someone had touched me, even that casually, in months. My skin tingled where his hand had been. He stood behind me, and our eyes met in the large, clear mirror. His gaze was steady, professional, but with that undercurrent of something else I couldn't quite name. Perceptive. That was it. He looked at my shaggy hair not with judgment, but with a kind of thoughtful consideration, like a sculptor sizing up a block of marble. "So, Leo," he began, his voice close to my ear, a low, pleasant rumble. "We just cleaning this up, or are you looking for a change?" I felt a blush creep up my neck. "Just clean it up, I guess. Make me look less like a guy who lives in a cave." A low chuckle escaped him, and I watched his reflection smile in the mirror. "I can do that. I think we can do better than not a caveman." He ran his hands through my hair, his fingers surprisingly gentle as he assessed the length and texture. His touch was firm, knowledgeable. My scalp prickled. My entire body felt hyper-aware of his proximity, of the heat radiating from his chest so close to my back, of the subtle scent of his cologne, that sandalwood, and something else, something faintly spicy, like cardamom. It was intoxicating. He began to work, and the world narrowed to the small space around the chair. There was the quiet, rhythmic snip-snip of his scissors, a precise and soothing sound. There was the weight of his hands as he guided my head, tilting it gently this way and that. I found myself closing my eyes, giving in to the sensation. I was so starved for human contact that this simple, professional service felt like an act of profound intimacy. I watched him in the mirror, my eyes half-lidded. He worked with focused grace, his brow furrowed slightly in concentration. The muscles in his forearms flexed with each movement. He was completely absorbed in his task, and I felt a strange sense of peace watching him. For the first time in a long time, my overactive brain was quiet. I wasn't thinking about deadlines or loneliness or the suffocating silence of my apartment. I was just here, present, feeling the gentle tug of the comb through my hair and the light pressure of his fingers against my scalp. "You're a designer, right?" Julian's voice broke the comfortable silence. My eyes snapped open. I stared at his reflection, startled. "How did you know that?" He smirked, not missing a beat with his scissors. "Call it a professional guess. You've got that look. The intense focus, like you're mentally kerning the letters on my shaving cream can. Plus," he added, his knuckles lightly grazing my temple as he trimmed the hair around my ear, "you've got a little bit of ink on your right index finger. The kind that never quite washes out." I glanced down at my hand resting on the arm of the chair. He was right. A tiny, faint smudge of cyan ink was permanently embedded in my cuticle, a ghost of 1,000 projects. I was stunned by his observation. People didn't usually notice things like that about me. People didn't usually look at me that closely. "Graphic design," I admitted, my voice a little hoarse. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to a fellow artist," he said. He moved to stand in front of me, leaning in to work on my bangs. His face was close now, his warm breath ghosting across my cheek. I could see the flecks of gold in his dark brown eyes. I held my breath, my heart doing a slow, heavy thud in my chest. "This," he said, making a small gesture with his scissors, "is just sculpture with a different medium." I found myself analyzing his every move, every micro-expression. The way his brow would furrow in concentration, the slight quirk of his lips when he was pleased with a particular section, the way his eyes would meet mine in the mirror for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. I was cataloging these details, hoarding them like treasures. My internal monologue, usually a self-critical drone, was now a frantic stream of questions. Is he just being friendly? Is this just good customer service? Or is this something else? The ambiguity was maddening and exhilarating. He switched from scissors to clippers, and the low buzz vibrated through the chair. He placed a steadying hand on my shoulder as he worked on the back of my neck. His hand was large and warm, and the weight of it was grounding. A simple, professional gesture. That's all it was. But it felt like an anchor in the swirling sea of my anxiety. My skin burned under his touch. I tried to focus on the cool metal of the clippers against my skin, on the jazz music, on anything other than the feel of his palm resting on my shoulder. "You're new to the neighborhood, right?" he asked, his voice a low rumble just over the hum of the clippers. "Lived here a couple of years," I mumbled, mesmerized by the focused look on his face in the mirror. "Just don't get out much." The admission felt shameful, a confession of my self-imposed exile. "I get that," he said, and there was no judgment in his tone, only a quiet understanding. "Took me a while to find my footing when I moved to the city. It's easy to get lost here, even when you're surrounded by people." He switched off the clippers, and the sudden silence felt charged. He brushed the loose hairs from my neck with a soft brush, his fingers tracing the new, clean line of my haircut. The touch was feather-light but sent a shiver down my spine. Each touch was a question mark. The brush of his knuckles against my cheek. The way his forearm rested against my shoulder as he leaned over me. The brief pressure of his hip against the arm of the chair as he moved around me. Were they accidental? Incidental? Or were they small, deliberate tests, little breadcrumbs of intention? My mind raced, trying to assemble the clues into a coherent picture, but the image kept shifting. I was a detective in a case where I desperately wanted a particular outcome, and I knew my judgment was compromised. He turned the chair to face the sink for a wash. "Lean back for me," he instructed, his voice soft. I did as he said, resting my head in the cool porcelain basin. The feeling of his fingers working shampoo into my scalp was almost sinfully good. His hands were strong and sure, his nails gently scraping against my skin in a way that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I closed my eyes again, letting out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. This was more than a haircut. It was a kind of therapy, a careful dismantling of the walls I'd built around myself. "You're tense," he murmured, his thumbs pressing into the tight muscles at the base of my skull. "You carry a lot of stress in your shoulders." "I am nothing but tense," I thought. "I am a walking, talking knot of tension and unspoken things. Comes with the job," I said instead, the lie feeling flimsy even to my own ears. He didn't call me on it. He just kept working his magic, his strong fingers kneading away the knots in my neck and scalp until I felt boneless and pliant in the chair. The warm water sluicing through my hair felt like absolution. When he was done, he wrapped my head in a warm, fluffy towel and gently helped me sit up. I felt dazed, my senses heightened, and my defenses lowered. The world seemed sharper, the colors in the shop richer, the saxophone on the stereo more poignant. He unwrapped the towel and began to comb my damp hair into place. He was using a styling cream now, and the scent was clean and green, like crushed leaves after a rainstorm. The haircut was done. I looked different. My face seemed more defined, my eyes clearer. The wild, neglected hair was gone, replaced by a style that was clean, sharp, and effortlessly masculine. It looked like the hair of a man who had his life together. It looked like the man I wanted to be. "What do you think?" he asked, his hands resting lightly on my shoulders as we both looked at my reflection. I searched for the right word. "It's perfect. Thank you." "My pleasure," he said, and his smile in the mirror was genuine and warm. The spell was broken. The service was over. It was time to pay and leave, to return to my silent apartment. A wave of disappointment washed over me, so strong it was almost dizzying. I didn't want to go. I wanted to stay here in this warm, fragrant bubble, in the quiet company of this man who saw ink on my finger and tension in my shoulders. But the transaction had to be completed. He removed the cape with a flourish, and I stood up, my legs feeling a little unsteady. I felt strangely exposed without the heavy fabric around me. As I reached for my wallet, he was already moving toward the back. "One last thing," he said, his voice casual. He returned with a straight razor and a can of shaving cream. The hot towel. On the house for a first-timer. Before I could protest, he was gently pushing me back into the chair. He tilted it back, and my heart began to pound again, a heavy, insistent drum against my ribs. He lathered the warm cream along my jaw and neck with a soft brush, his movements methodical and soothing. Then he laid a steaming towel over the lower half of my face. The heat was intense, the damp weight of it comforting. The scent of eucalyptus and lavender filled my senses, and I was plunged into a dark, warm, muffled world. All I was aware of was the heat on my skin and the sound of my own breathing, loud in my ears. This felt impossibly intimate. To be lying back, vulnerable, with a man I'd just met holding a razor to my throat. But I wasn't afraid. I trusted him implicitly. I trusted the steadiness of his hands, the calm confidence in his eyes. He removed the towel, and the cool air on my heated skin was a shock. He held the razor with an expert's grip, and with a series of short, precise strokes, he cleaned up the stray hairs on my neck and cheeks. His concentration was absolute. His face was just inches from mine. I watched the way his lashes cast shadows on his cheekbones, the small, focused line between his brows. I was so close I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He wiped away the last of the cream with a clean, damp towel. His touch was gentle, careful. He lingered for a moment, his hand cupping my jaw, his thumb resting just below my bottom lip. The world seemed to stop. The jazz music faded away. The ticking of the clock on the wall fell silent. There was only the weight of his thumb against my skin, the heat of his palm against my jaw. This is it. This is the moment. My mind is screaming. This is not just customer service. This is not an accident. He didn't move. His dark eyes were locked on mine, and they were no longer just perceptive. They were searching. He was asking a question without words, a question that hung in the charged air between us. Then, slowly, deliberately, he traced my lip with his thumb. It was the softest touch I had ever felt, a barely there caress that sent a bolt of lightning straight through my core. It was an impossibly gentle, impossibly bold gesture. A line had been crossed. The carefully maintained barrier of professional distance had just been vaporized. My breath hitched in my throat. My entire being was focused on that single point of contact, the rough pad of his thumb against the sensitive skin of my lip. He held my gaze, his expression unreadable but intense. The air crackled. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken things. He had made his move, a quiet, subtle declaration. And now, the space was mine to fill. The choice was mine to make. I could pull away, laugh it off, pretend it was an accident. I could pay for my haircut and walk out the door, back to my safe, silent life. The thought was a physical pain, a closing of a door I hadn't even known was open. Or I could answer. The fear was a cold knot in my stomach. The fear of rejection, of humiliation, of making a fool of myself. It had been my constant companion for so long, a voice that whispered caution and doubt into my every decision. But for the first time, another feeling was stronger. A deep, resonant yearning. A desire to step out of the audience and onto the stage. A need to meet this gesture with one of my own. My hand, which had been resting limply on the arm of the chair, moved. It felt like it was moving through water, slow and heavy with the weight of the decision. My mind was a whirlwind of panic and hope. What am I doing? Stop. This is crazy. Don't stop. Please, don't let me stop. I didn't pull away. I didn't speak. I acted. My hand reached out, not for his arm, but for something more personal, more deliberate. I returned the favor somewhere else. My fingers found the hem of his black t-shirt, and I rested my palm flat against the small of his back, my thumb hooking into the waistband of his jeans. It was a place of quiet intimacy, a gesture that was both a question and an answer. My skin made contact with his, the warmth of him seeping through the thin cotton of his shirt. I felt the hard plane of muscle, the slight curve of his spine. It was an anchor, a claim. Under my hand, I felt him jolt, just slightly. A sharp intake of breath. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly, the last of his professional composure falling away. The mischief was gone, replaced by a raw, naked vulnerability that mirrored my own. The question in his eyes had been answered. He didn't pull away. He leaned in. The space between us, once charged with tension, now collapsed. He closed the final few inches, his other hand coming up to gently cup the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my newly cut hair. His lips met mine. It wasn't a hard, demanding kiss. It was soft. It was searching. It was hesitant at first, a gentle press of his mouth against mine, a question. I answered by leaning into him, my hand on his back, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, and a soft, wounded sound escaped my throat. It was the sound of 2 years of loneliness and longing being released in a single breath. His lips were warm and soft, and he tasted faintly of coffee and mint. It was a kiss that felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. It was honest. It was not rushed. It was everything I hadn't known I was starving for. My entire body hummed with a current of pure, unadulterated feeling. All the overthinking, the anxiety, the second-guessing, It all melted away in the simple, profound rightness of this moment. There was no room for anything but the feel of his mouth on mine, the solid weight of his body leaning against the chair, the tangle of his fingers in my hair. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. His thumb was still stroking the back of my neck, a slow, soothing rhythm. My hand was still pressed against the small of his back, a silent testament to the line we had just crossed together. "Leo," he whispered, his voice thick. It was just my name, but he said it like it was a revelation. "Julian," I breathed back. Neither of us knew what to say next. The air was still thick, but not with tension anymore. It was thick with possibility. He straightened up, and a flicker of something, panic, regret, shot through me. But he didn't step away. He just looked down at me, his expression soft and a little dazed. He reached over and flipped the little sign on the front door from open to closed. The click of the lock sounded like a promise. I left the shop 20 minutes later, my head spinning. We hadn't kissed again. We had just talked. Stilted, awkward sentences at first, then easier, more fluid conversation. We talked about my work, his shop, the city. It was mundane and extraordinary all at once. When I finally paid for the haircut, my hand brushed his as he gave me my change, and the spark was still there, a low, steady hum beneath the surface. I'll see you around," I'd said, the words feeling hopelessly inadequate. "I'm here Tuesday through Saturday," he'd replied, his eyes holding mine. "My chair's always open for you." The subtext was a tangible thing. Walking home, the city streets seemed brighter, the sound sharper. I felt like I was floating a few inches off the pavement. I kept touching my lips, the skin still tingling from his kiss. I could still feel the phantom weight of his hand on my jaw, the ghost of his forehead pressed against mine. I got back to my apartment, and the silence that greeted me was different. It wasn't the thick, suffocating silence of before. It was a quiet, waiting silence. A silence filled with the echo of a low, warm voice and the memory of a perfect, unexpected kiss. The next morning, the euphoria had curdled into a thick paste of anxiety. I woke up with a jolt, the memory of the kiss hitting me with the force of a physical blow. And immediately, the old, familiar voice of doubt started its insidious whisper in my ear. "You misread everything. He was just being friendly, and you took it too far. You forced yourself on him. He was just being polite by not shoving you away. He probably regrets it. He's probably laughing about the desperate, lonely guy who threw himself at him." The thoughts were a vicious, relentless cycle. I paced my apartment, my hands running through my perfect new haircut, a haircut that now felt like a brand, a mark of my foolishness. The confidence I'd felt walking out of his shop had evaporated, leaving behind a residue of shame and regret. I replayed every moment, every touch, every glance, but now I viewed them through a filter of self-loathing. His thumb on my lip? A professional gesture to wipe away stray cream that I had sexualized. My hand on his back? An aggressive, unwanted advance. The kiss? A pathetic, desperate act. I spent the entire day in a fog of anxiety. I tried to work, but the lines on my screen blurred together. I couldn't focus. Every time the phone buzzed, my heart leaped into my throat, expecting, I don't know what, a text from him telling me to never come back? I avoided my window, terrified I might see him on the street. I didn't want to walk past his shop. The thought of seeing that closed sign again, but this time feeling its finality, was more than I could bear. By the third day, I had convinced myself it was all a fantasy, a product of my touch-starved imagination. He was a charming, handsome barber. He was probably like that with all his clients. I was nothing special. The kiss was a mistake, a moment of madness. I would never hear from him again. It was better this way, I told myself. It was safer to retreat back into my shell, to the predictable comfort of my solitude. The ache in my chest was back, but this time it was sharper, more acute. It was the pain of a hope that had been born and died in the space of 72 hours. I was sitting on my sofa, staring at a blank wall, nursing a cold cup of coffee, when my phone buzzed on the table. I ignored it. It was probably my mother, or a notification about a software update. It buzzed again. A text message. With a heavy sigh, I picked it up. The screen lit up with a number I didn't recognize. My heart stopped. The message was simple. 5 words. "My chair's empty. Thought of you." I read it once. Twice. A dozen times. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, shaking. My mind was a blank slate. The voice of doubt was momentarily silenced by a surge of pure, unadulterated shock. He had texted me. How did he even get my number? Then I remembered. I had to give it when I paid with my card for his records. He had sought it out. He had thought of me. The simplicity of it was what got me. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an explanation. It was an invitation. A quiet, confident reassurance. It cut through all my anxiety and self-doubt with the clean precision of his straight razor. Thought of you. I typed and deleted a dozen responses. Hi. Hey. Hello, Julian. This is Leo. They all sounded stupid, formal, robotic. Finally, I just typed the truth. I thought of you too. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The three little dots that appeared on his end were the most stressful and exhilarating thing I had seen all week. A moment later, his reply came. Good. Are you busy tonight? My fingers flew across the screen. No. There's a little Italian place on Elm Street. Divino. You know it. Meet me there at 7. Okay. See you then, Leo. I fell back against the sofa, the phone clutched in my hand like a holy relic. A date. I had a date. With Julian. The anxiety hadn't vanished completely, but it was now overlaid with a giddy, terrifying excitement. The test was coming. Could the magic of that small, intimate shop exist out here, in the real world? Could we be two men having dinner, instead of a barber and his client? I was about to find out. The hours leading up to 7 o'clock were a blur of nervous energy. I showered, changed my shirt 3 times, and stared at my reflection, trying to see myself through his eyes. The haircut still looked perfect. It was my anchor, a reminder of the confidence he had given me. I arrived at Divino 5 minutes early, my palms sweating. It was a small, cozy restaurant, with checkered tablecloths and candles flickering on every table. It was blessedly quiet. I saw him before he saw me. He was sitting at a small table in the corner, nursing a glass of red wine. He was wearing a simple gray Henley that stretched across his chest, and his hair was slightly damp, as if he'd just showered after work. He looked even better outside the confines of his shop. He looked up as I approached, and his face broke into that slow, warm smile, the one that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. The anxiety that had been churning in my stomach began to dissolve. Hey, he said, standing up to greet me. Glad you could make it. Hey, I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. Thanks for this. Of course. The first few minutes were awkward. We were two strangers who had shared an intensely intimate moment, and now we had to navigate the mundane rituals of a first date. We talked about the menu. We talked about the weather. It was stilted and polite. The easy, charged chemistry we'd had in the shop felt distant, and a flicker of panic went through me. Maybe it was just a fluke. Maybe we had nothing in common outside of that one specific context. But Julian, as always, seemed to sense my unease. He put down his menu, leaned forward, and fixed me with that perceptive gaze. Okay, he said, his voice low. Can we just admit this is a little weird? A laugh escaped me, a burst of relieved air. Yeah, it's weird. Good. I was worried it was just me, he said, his smile returning. I've never asked a client out on a date before, especially not after. Well, you know, I've never kissed my barber before, I admitted, a blush rising on my cheeks. And just like that, the tension broke. The awkwardness dissipated, replaced by the familiar, comfortable energy I remembered. We started talking, really talking. He asked me about my design work, and his questions were smart and insightful. He didn't just ask what I did. He asked why I did it, what I loved about it. I found myself opening up, telling him about my passion for typography and color theory, things I rarely talked about with anyone. I learned about him, too. He had grown up in a small town upstate, and had learned the trade from his grandfather, who had owned the town's only barber shop for 50 years. He'd moved to the city to open his own place, to build something that was his. He spoke about his craft with a quiet passion that I recognized, because I felt the same way about my own work. We were both artists, just with different canvases. The food came and went. The wine was poured and drunk. We talked for hours, and it felt like minutes. I discovered the man behind the confident barber. He was funny, with a dry, self-deprecating wit. He was kind, telling a story about an elderly client he gave free haircuts to. And he was just as nervous as I was. I saw it in the way he would fiddle with his wine glass, The way he would sometimes break eye contact for a moment before looking back at me. This confident, handsome man was vulnerable, too, and that made him even more attractive. When the bill came, we split it. As we stood up to leave, a comfortable silence fell between us. The question of what came next hung in the air. We walked out onto the cool night street. "I had a really good time tonight, Leo," he said, his hands in his pockets. "Me too," I said, and it was the truest thing I'd said all day. We stood there for a moment on the sidewalk, under the glow of a street lamp. The city buzzed around us, but it felt like we were in our own little bubble again. He took a step closer. "Can I walk you home?" he asked. I nodded, my throat suddenly tight. The walk to my apartment was quiet, but it was a comfortable, contented quiet. Our hands brushed a few times, and the small, electric jolt was still there. When we reached my building, we stopped at the front door. This was it, the end of the night, the moment of truth. "Well," I said, turning to face him. "This is me." "I know," he said softly. He had looked up my address when he got my number. The thought sent a thrill through me. He didn't move to leave. He just stood there, looking at me, his expression unreadable in the dim light. My heart was hammering again. I knew what I wanted. I wanted to invite him up. But the fear was still there, a faint echo of the morning's panic. What if I was moving too fast? What if I scared him off? As if reading my mind, he reached out and took my hand. His fingers laced with mine, his palm warm and calloused against my own. It was a simple, deliberate gesture, a reassurance. "Leo," he said, his voice gentle. "I'm not going to pretend I know what this is. But I know I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since you walked into my shop." Relief washed over me, so potent it made my knees weak. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you either." He brought my hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to my knuckles. His eyes never left mine. "So, are you going to invite me up, or are we going to stand out here all night?" A smile spread across my face. "What makes you think I want to invite you up?" I teased, feeling a surge of confidence. His lips quirked into a smirk. "Call it a professional guess." I unlocked the door and led him upstairs. My apartment, which had for so long been a fortress of solitude, suddenly felt different with him in it. It felt full. He didn't fill the silence with chatter. He just moved through the space with a quiet grace, taking in my books, my art on the walls, the view from my window. He came to stand behind me as I looked out at the city lights. He didn't touch me, but I could feel his warmth at my back. We stood like that for a long time, just watching the river of headlights below. "You have a nice place," he said finally. "It feels like you. Quiet and a little cluttered." I asked, my tone self-deprecating. "No," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Calm and deliberate." I turned to face him. He was so close. The air was thick with the same charged energy as before, but this time it wasn't laced with uncertainty. It was laced with anticipation. I made the choice. I stepped into his space, closing the last few inches between us. I slid my hands up his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart under my palm. "Julian," I whispered. He wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me flush against him. "Leo," he breathed, and then he lowered his head and kissed me. This kiss was different from the first. It was deeper, more confident. There was no hesitation. It was a kiss of mutual want, of shared understanding. It was a confirmation of everything we had felt, everything we had said and left unsaid. It was the beginning of something new. The days that followed blurred into a quiet, happy rhythm. Julian would come over after he closed the shop, smelling of sandalwood and shaving cream. We would cook dinner together in my small kitchen, bumping hips and stealing kisses over the steaming pasta. We'd sit on my sofa, my legs thrown over his lap, and talk for hours. Or sometimes, we wouldn't talk at all, just exist in the same space, the comfortable silence a testament to our growing connection. My apartment was no longer silent. It was filled with the sound of his low laughter, the soft jazz he liked to play, the quiet sound of our breathing as we slept. He never officially moved in, but he had a toothbrush in my bathroom and a drawer with a few of his t-shirts in my dresser. He had carved out a space for himself in my life, and I had willingly, eagerly, given it to him. One Saturday morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. I opened my eyes and saw Julian standing by the window, a mug in his hand, looking out at the city. He was wearing a pair of my gray sweatpants and an old t-shirt, and he looked so perfectly, breathtakingly at home. The morning light caught the lines of his face, and my chest swelled with a feeling so powerful it almost hurt. It was a feeling I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a very long time. He turned and saw me watching him, and a slow, sleepy smile spread across his face. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I replied, my voice thick with sleep. He walked over to the bed and sat on the edge, leaning down to kiss me. It was a soft, chaste kiss, full of morning breath and easy affection. He handed me the other mug he was holding. The coffee was exactly how I liked it. Of course it was. He paid attention. We sat there for a while, sipping our coffee in comfortable silence, the city waking up below us. I watched his face, the way his brow furrowed slightly as he concentrated on the view, the same way it did when he was cutting hair. I realized that I had spent so much time observing him from a distance, analyzing his every move, and now he was here, a solid, warm presence beside me. I didn't have to guess what he was thinking anymore. I could just ask. "What are you thinking about?" I asked softly. He turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "I was just thinking about that first day you came into the shop." He reached out and tucked a stray piece of hair behind my ear. "You looked so scared, like a stray cat that was expecting to be kicked." I flushed. I was terrified. "I know," he said, his thumb stroking my cheek. "But you were brave, too. You stayed. And then, you reached out." He looked down at my hand, which was resting on the blanket, and covered it with his own. "When you touched my back, Leo, I thought my heart was going to beat out of my chest." "Mine too," I confessed. He laced his fingers with mine. "I'd been watching you for weeks," he admitted, his voice quiet. "I'd see you walk past the shop, always in a hurry, always looking at the ground. I wanted to meet you, but I didn't know how. And then one day, you walked in. It felt like fate." My heart squeezed. He had seen me. All those times I had felt invisible, he had seen me. The final piece of my old, lonely life clicked away. The silence I had lived in for so long was not an absence of noise, but an absence of connection. Julian had filled that silence, not with noise, but with presence, with warmth, with a quiet, steady love that was slowly, patiently, healing the parts of me I thought were broken forever. I looked at him, this man who had coaxed me out of my cave with a pair of scissors and a steady hand. This man who saw an artist, not a hermit. This man who had traced my lip with his thumb and waited for me to answer. I no longer felt like an observer. I was here, in the messy, beautiful, interconnected world. I was a participant. And as he leaned in to kiss me again, the taste of coffee and the promise of a shared future on his lips, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I had finally come home.